Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're in round 9 of our coverage of the 2016 Tata Steel Tournament. Our competitor today, White's going to be played by the 16-year-old prodigy from China, Wei Yi, playing a pretty good tournament so far. His opponent, David Navara, the Czech Republic Grandmaster, probably had the biggest upset of the tournament last round, beating Fabiano Caruana. In the leaders, we have Magnus Carlsen in first place and Fabiano in second place. They were tied for a while, but after that slipped to David Navara in the last round. Fabiano is now in second place. So both of our competitors today, Wei Yi and David Navara, both have 4 points out of the possible 8. So going into round 9, both of them looking for a strong performance if they can start to climb up the leaderboard. So we'll start out. Wei Yi plays pawn to e4, pawn e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, and then knight to f6. So getting into the Berlin defense, something that we've seen more and more frequently. Magnus Carlsen really started playing it a lot against Vishy Anand in the World Championships, and ever since then we see it popping up more and more in Grandmaster play. Now, for White usually has a few options from here. Magnus Carlsen really likes the castling on the king side. That's kind of the open variation. But we see kind of a little different approach from Wei Yi. He plays pawn to d3. Now, two ways that black can kind of respond. One is to kind of play a pretty aggressive bishop here to c5, and the other one is pawn to d6, sort of a mirror of what White's doing. He opts for the more aggressive line, bishop here to c5, and then White usually, if you kind of seen this opening in the past, you normally see a pawn to c3. Either one, it doesn't matter if it's pawn to d6 or bishop here to c5. Pawn to c3 is pretty common. Instead, we see a new variation that seems to be pretty exciting to play, and that's the bishop taking here on c6. Probably a slight improvement over the pawn here to c3. So after the pawn takes here on c6, we see knight to d2. Now, if you kind of look at it and say, well, this pawn right here just looks right for the taken for the knight here on e5, this would definitely be a mistake. After knight to e5, then the queen could come down here to d4, looking at the checkmate here on f2. White's kind of forced to stop this with either bishop to e3. We could have king castle on the king side. A few options there, but all in all, this knight here is going to fall on e5, so that's going to be very, very bad. So instead we see knight here to d2, castle on the king side, and then knight up here to a d4. Same logic would apply why the knight could not take here on e5. The queen's just going to come down here to d4. Now we can see knight to c4. And this is adding a real attacker, since we already talked about this. Knight's not going to take here on e5, but this knight here potentially could. This knight here on f3 is still protecting this square in d4 where the queen would like to come to. So this knight attacking it now kind of forces black to start to defend this square. He could defend it with knight here to g4. He could defend it with knight here to d7. He could also defend it with rook here to e8. He opts for knight here to d7. I really like the more aggressive knight here to g4. Still opens up the door for the light square bishop to easily get involved. It doesn't block it off, but decides to go for knight here to d7, and then queen to e2. Just continuing his development. Doesn't want to block off his dark square bishop. Still leaving himself open. He could castle on the king side. He could castle on the queen side. So a very, very nice opening. It really looks like Wei Yi is really prepared for this variation. I'm not really sure David Navara so much has seen this variation. So Navara continues with rook to e8, putting more protection on the square here on e5. Bishop here to d2, completing his development. And then bishop back to d6, just adding another layer of protection. And you can kind of tell from black, he's not exactly sure what White has up his sleeve, so he's kind of in complete defensive mode. He's not really trying anything, and so he's kind of just waiting to see what White's going to do. White decides to be pretty aggressive. He plays pawn here to h4, more than likely signifying that he's going to castle on the queen side, start to push forward on the king side. So we see pawn here to c5, not doing a ton, but decides that he needs to start to do a little bit on the queen side. Pawn up here to h5, pawn to h6, stopping this attack a little bit, and then castle on the queen side, getting ready for the rook to get involved into the action. Now, if you look at the queen rook over here on a8, it's going to take a while for this rook to actually get involved into the action. You're going to move the knight first, get the light square bishop involved, probably move the queen first, then connect the rooks. And even then, it's not clear how it could really get involved into the action in a way that's going to add a lot of benefit. So knight back here to b8. And this is kind of where you feel like David Navara is just not completely prepared for this opening. He kind of brought his knight here to d7. Now he's bringing it back here to kind of maneuver it to c6. He's kind of studied the board, taking a little bit more time than he'd probably like and saying, okay, I need to readjust some things. I don't like my position now. I've kind of blocked off my light square bishop. I need to get my knight to a place where it's protecting the center of the board a little bit better. So brings his knight back to b8. But, Wei Yi on the other side, he knows exactly what he's doing. He continues with his game plan of let's throw everything on the king side of the board and see what we can do. So rook over here to a g1, knight here to c6, and then pawn up here to g4, just looking to push forward as much as possible. Pawn here to f6, pushing even more. Pawn here to g5, and then the pawn captures, and then knight takes here on g5. And this is pretty interesting because it's somewhat tough for the pawn to take here on g5. We're now going to see the bishop take. More than likely from here, the bishop's going to come here to e7. The bishop could capture, the queen recaptures. Pawn up here to h6. This gets pretty tricky. You probably don't want to play pawn here to g6 because this pawn's not protected. So you just see rook here to g6 check. That's going to be bad. No protection in front of the king. You have two rooks over here, a pawn. You can easily get your queen involved into the game. That's going to be bad. But if you do play the pawn here to g5, it does have protection from the queen here. But now the queen here to h5, that gets dangerous. You can push a little further with pawn to h7. You can push here with queen here to g6. Depending on what black does, you could take the pawn here on g5 with either your rook or your queen. It gets really, really difficult for black to kind of hold on to. So black found another variation, which I also don't really like. But he played knight here to d4, forcing the queen back. But the queen's on a similar square. d1 is still protecting and attacking the square here on h5. And now black decides that he wants to go ahead and roll the dices and play pawn taking here on g5. Okay, so giddy up. The bishop takes here on g5, the bishop to e7. And I think he could probably just take here on e7. We kind of looked at a variation just a second ago of exactly what that would look like. He decides to go ahead and hold on to it, plays bishop here to e3. Now bishop to f6. Pawn here to h6, just pushing forward as much as possible. And then black continues with his, I have no idea what to do, even though I'm playing in a rather large tournament. I'm a really skilled player. Plays rook here to e7. Another move that I really don't like. I never want to give up all the pawns in front of my king. That just seems like a really bad idea. So let's look at some of his other options. He could play pawn here to g6. That's probably the worst. Just rook here to g6 check. That's going to be really bad. If we play the pawn to g5, a little bit different variation, but we could still see the bishop take here on g5. If the bishop retakes, then pawn up here to f4. This gets really brutal. The bishop can't take right here because the rook pinning down the bishop to the king right here. If the pawn were to take, then it gets really difficult with the queen to h5. You would kind of like a discovered attack with pawn to f3, but then the bishop's just going to fall. Pawn here to f3, and then all of a sudden check, and then it's just really difficult for black to have to deal with that. So if we come back, even after here, we see the king come to h8. Rook takes here on g5. That was going to fall. Could try something creative. Knight here to e2. Check. Move the king. But then all in all, black is going to be forced to resign. There's no way to stop all of this threats. And if you kind of look at it, look at all these powerful pieces over here that black has never even gotten involved into the game. So after pawn to h6, we see rook to e7. Wants to go ahead and give up that material. So Wei Yi decides, hey, yeah, I'll go ahead and take that material. That's fine with me. So after the rook takes, then we're going to see the queen get involved into the game. So queen here to h5. And then we see the bishop to e6. Just wants to get more material involved into the game. Plays bishop to a6. Probably much better in this position. It was a pretty intense variation you have to go through, a lot of calculations, so he's probably keeping it a lot easier. But from here, he could have played just queen here to h8. After this, it's kind of a forced move. You have king to f7. Now the rook's going to take. Bishop could recapture. Now knight taking here on e5. Check. Forcing kind of a capture here. Rook up here to h7. The king's going to force to move. You can kind of maneuver a little bit. All of a sudden, the bishop's going to fall. The queen's just kind of forced to maneuver and help as much as possible. But after some checks, then you can see the bishop take here. All in all, we're going to see more material fall on board. The queen's eventually going to fall, or is going to give up a checkmate on board. So this is going to be extremely bad for black. It probably would have been a little faster win, but decided to instead play a safer route that he didn't have to think too much about, and that was bishop here to h6. But his opponent just continues to not play the optimal moves, but he really didn't have a chance in this position anyway. But bishop here to f7. Bishop takes here on g7. Bishop takes the queen. That's fine. Bishop takes here on f6. Discovered attack, forcing the king to have protection or move, and also attack the queen here on d6. So king here to f8. Bishop takes. Knight down here to e2. Decides he wants to go ahead and get material right here. But then after the bishop takes here on c7, then we do see a resign from black. There's just no way to stop white. He has kind of everything covered. If the bishop moves, because the bishop's being attacked by the rook, the rook's just going to come here to g1, capture this material. He has more pawns on board. He has way more material going into the endgame. That's going to be an easy game. If he moves the knight, the bishop's going to fall. If he tries, rook over here to c8, bishop here to d6, check, the king is forced to move. Then you could just start to take more material. You could take either the knight, could take the bishop, could start to take pawns off the board. All in all, just complete, utter domination by white. So black decides to go ahead and resign in this position. So a really impressive game. Probably the entire tournament so far, from what I've seen, the most impressive performance. Really fascinating how he prepared for this game. A slight variation from the normal Berlin defense as far as how white attacks that. Led to just a complete surprise. Black had no idea how to defend it. All in all, 16-year-old came out and dominated. So he's kind of moved up the charts, 5 points out of 9. A really good performance from him. Magnus Carlsen still at the top, but all in all, a fantastic round. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this exciting round, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.